owners who let a couple of dogs wreak havoc on some of the neighborhood kids and dogs. For a long time, I had a healthy dislike for German Shepherds based on my unpleasant interactions with a member of that breed who was the town bully. If you were to ask my dad, he'd tell you about an Airedale Terrier who ran off his property and jumped Bud. My dad had to intervene, risking serious damage to himself, but he was able to separate the two of them. Bud was on the ropes, and my dad saved him. I share that story because it illustrates a couple of things. First, dogs are animals, and as much as we like to believe that their sweet and gentle nature rules the day, they do have a potential for violent action, either when threatened or simply because their genetic makeup drives them to it. That's true for any breed of dog, though natural faulty wiring is somewhat rare. We never found out what set off that Airedale Terrier. His owner was equally mystified. To hear him tell it, the dog had no history of such extreme boundary aggression. But something none of us humans could determine had prompted him to attack on that particular day and in that particular encounter. That said, the dog didn't just suddenly lose his mind, as I've heard many people say about their dogs. Something in the dog's history caused him to respond to my dad and Bud as a perceived threat. There's always a reason why dogs react the way they do. The trouble is that we aren't always able to discern that cause. This book will help you better read your dog, other dogs, environments, and circumstances to prevent those kinds of unfortunate events from taking place. The second reason I told that story is because it illustrates the bond between man and dog. Dad was willing to get torn up in order to keep Bud from suffering the same fate. It's beyond the scope of this book to go into the long history of human-canine relations, but at some point humans and dogs figured out that by working together, they would enrich their lives in some way. I'd imagine that at some point early humans hunted prehistoric versions of dogs for food. That eventually transitioned into humans recognizing that dogs were also very good hunters and could be used as a tool rather than seen as an adversary. From the dog's perspective, humans had something they wanted too. They had resources like food and shelter. Most likely that came about as their natural scavenging efforts put them more and more in contact with us. When either we offered them some scrap or they laid claim to what we'd left behind, their natural associative way of thinking produced this equation: humans equal benefit. Similarly, we arrived at the same conclusion. If dogs could help us collect more resources and also provide us with some security, then dogs equal benefit. In its simplest form, that is what a symbiotic relationship is all about. We both benefit from being around and interacting with one another. Understanding how the initial relationship between dogs and humans developed is the underlying basic principle of my dog training methodology. When you begin training a dog and developing a relationship with him, you are repeating this historical human-canine evolution in a compressed time format. Keep in mind several points about this relationship that we've come to cherish. It didn't take place overnight. It is founded on mutual trust, and it resulted in dogs doing more and more things for us that they weren't naturally inclined to do. What's implicit in taking this approach is that human beings took charge of the relationship. Let me repeat that. Human beings took charge of the relationship. We saw dogs' natural abilities and then shaped their genetic destiny to a certain extent to meet our needs. Today, our needs are different from those of our ancestors, but that doesn't mean that the relationship dynamic should be inverted. We are still in charge. When I see so-called problem dogs, the problems stem from an imbalance of power in the relationship and not from the dog. That is why it is important that you be in command of yourself, your understanding of dogs and their psychology, and my approach to training in order to be better able to control your dog. Dogs are intelligent animals, but in comparison to humans, they are simple association creatures. If you've owned a dog, you already know this to be true. If each time you pick up your car keys and then take your dog with you to some location and he has a positive experience, then he will come to associate that sound with some